The Lunar Haven Hotel, with its sleek, futuristic architecture and promise of unparalleled luxury, had been my home for a week during a business conference in Seattle. It was a place that seemed to exist outside the realm of the ordinary, a bubble of curated perfection. So, when I checked out, expecting the usual, itemized bill, the reality presented was jarring, to say the least. The receptionist, a woman with a perpetually pleasant smile, slid the printed statement across the polished counter. My eyes scanned the list, a frown creasing my brow. Gourmet meals charged to my room, expensive spa treatments, a private city tour, all things I had most certainly not indulged in. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice calm but firm. I didn't order any of these. The receptionist's smile didn't falter. I assure you, sir, these charges are all linked to room 309, your room. But that's impossible, I insisted, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I was at the conference all day, every day. I barely spent any time in the hotel, let alone used these services. We went back and forth for a few minutes, a polite but increasingly tense exchange, but she remained adamant. The charges, she claimed, were valid. I left the hotel feeling frustrated and bewildered, the strange incident casting a shadow over what had otherwise been a successful trip. The mystery deepened a few days later when I was back home, settling back into my routine. The phone rang, and the caller ID displayed the name of the Lunar Haven Hotel. It was the hotel manager, a Mr. Harrison, his voice a strange mix of apology and suppressed urgency. Mr. Davies, he began, his tone unusually grave, I believe we owe you an explanation, and an apology. He went on to explain that they had reviewed the hotel's security footage after my complaint. What they found was, in his words, highly unusual. The footage showed a person, a man who looked exactly like me, moving through the hotel, dining in the restaurant, enjoying the spa, even embarking on the city tour. This individual was always just out of clear camera range, his features slightly blurred, but the resemblance was undeniable. The staff had assumed it was me. My blood ran cold. A doppelganger? It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, utterly absurd and yet, presented with such sincerity by Mr. Harrison, it was impossible to dismiss outright. We have a history of this, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if he were sharing a dark secret. We call them shadow guests. They appear from time to time, always associated with occupied rooms, always mirroring the guests, but not quite perfectly. He described how this shadow guest had ordered my favorite dish at the hotel restaurant, a specific pasta dish with a unique combination of ingredients that I had never mentioned to anyone at the hotel. How did he know? It was a detail that sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. It was as if this entity had access to my innermost thoughts, my private preferences. In the entire history of the hotel, it has only happened twice before, Mr. Harrison went on, his voice heavy with a strange mix of fear and fascination. The first time, we managed to corner the shadow guest. He panicked, caused a fire in the West Wing in a failed attempt to flee. He paused, and I could almost hear him swallow hard on the other end of the line. The second time was a few years later. We never managed to catch that one. It just vanished. The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. This shadow guest, this doppelganger, was not just a harmless apparition. It was capable of interaction, of deception, and, as history showed, of violence. The hotel, naturally, refunded all the erroneous charges and offered me a complimentary stay, an offer I politely declined. But the money was the least of my concerns. The encounter had shaken me to my core, leaving me with a profound sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, of being imitated, of being somehow violated on a level I couldn't quite comprehend. I couldn't sleep properly for weeks. Every reflection, every shadow, seemed to hold a sinister potential. Was I still being mirrored? Was there a shadow me out there, living a parallel life, mimicking my actions, my desires? Then, a few days later, the story broke in the local Seattle newspapers. The headline screamed, "Police investigate shadow guest phenomenon at luxury hotel." The article detailed the incident, quoting anonymous sources within the hotel and mentioning the ongoing police investigation. And then, a few days after the article's publication, a follow-up arrest made in shadow guest case. The police had apprehended a man named Ethan, a known drug addict living in a dilapidated apartment building just a few miles from the Lunar Haven. He was found with forged documents, disguises, and, chillingly, detailed notes about various hotel guests, including me. But there was a problem. The man was gaunt, almost skeletal, had a long beard, and his hair was a mess. It didn't match the image on the hotel's security cameras at all. So why would the police arrest him? The police, however, refused to release further details, citing the ongoing investigation. The media frenzy eventually died down, but my unease didn't. Was Ethan the shadow guest? Or was he merely a scapegoat, a convenient explanation for a phenomenon that defied rational understanding? Or, scariest of all, was he an accomplice, helping the shadow guest move around undetected? The official story was that Ethan was a delusional individual who had somehow managed to impersonate guests at the hotel. But I knew what I had seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen, a clear, undeniable image of my own face on the hotel's security footage. The year was 2018. The dazzling lights of the Las Vegas Strip, a kaleidoscope of neon and glitter, were a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the medical conference I was attending. I was an exhibitor, showcasing the latest in pharmaceutical advancements, and the long days on my feet, coupled with the forced enthusiasm of sales pitches, had left me utterly drained. My sanctuary in this city of excess was a room at the Mandalay Bay, a well-known hotel whose towering presence dominated the south end of the Strip. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I returned to my room, eager for the solace of a hot shower and a comfortable bed. As I entered, a subtle dissonance registered in my mind. It wasn't anything overt, just a slight disruption of the order I'd imposed on the room that morning. My toiletries, usually lined up neatly on the bathroom counter, were slightly askew. A few papers on the desk, which I'd meticulously stacked, were now in a slightly different order. I paused, a flicker of unease passing through me. Had housekeeping been in? It seemed odd, they usually serviced the rooms earlier in the day. I brushed it off, attributing it to a new cleaning schedule or my own tired mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was in Vegas, a city built on illusion and sleight of hand. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, pulling back the crisp white sheets, I found it. A small, folded piece of paper, tucked discreetly under my pillow. My heart skipped a beat. I unfolded it, my fingers trembling slightly. The words, written in a cramped, almost childlike handwriting, sent a chill down my spine, "I like watching you sleep." A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated fear. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a prank, a misplaced note. This was a violation, a deliberate act of intrusion that shattered the illusion of safety and privacy I'd taken for granted. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, my mind racing. I called the front desk, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained what I'd found. The operator's initially calm demeanor shifted to one of alarm as she assured me she would send security up immediately. The minutes that followed were an eternity. I stood in the middle of the room, my senses on high alert, every creak of the building, every distant siren, amplifying my fear. The room, once a haven, now felt like a cage, the walls closing in on me. 2 security guards, their faces grim, arrived promptly. They searched the room meticulously, their movements efficient and practiced, but found nothing out of place, nothing to suggest that anyone had been there. The note, the sole piece of evidence, felt flimsy, almost unreal in the face of their thoroughness. The next day, the hotel management, to their credit, took the matter very seriously. They were apologetic, horrified, and offered to move me to a different floor, a suite several levels above my previous room. They also promised to review the security footage, to find out who had entered my room. The new room was luxurious, with a breathtaking view of the Strip, but the opulence did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I felt exposed, vulnerable, the glittering panorama outside my window a constant reminder of the hidden darkness that lurked beneath the city's shining facade. Later that day, the head of security, a Mr. Henderson, a man whose stoicism was probably a job requirement, came to see me. He informed me, his voice devoid of emotion, that they had found something on the security footage. A hotel employee, a member of the maintenance staff, a man named Samuel, had been captured on camera entering my room using a master key. The footage showed him moving around the room, rifling through my belongings, and finally, placing the note under my pillow. He was immediately fired, and the police were called. They found more in his locker, similar notes, and small, personal items belonging to other guests, mostly women it turned out. It became sickeningly clear that I was not the first victim of his disturbing obsession. He had a long history of doing this. He had been fired from 2 other hotels for similar behavior, but had somehow slipped through the cracks during the hiring process. The relief I felt at his apprehension was quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of violation. The thought of this man, this stranger, moving through my room, touching my things, watching me sleep, sent shivers down my spine. The knowledge that he had done this to others, that my experience was not an isolated incident, only amplified the horror. I left Las Vegas soon after, the city's vibrant energy now tainted by a lingering sense of unease. The Stanley Hotel. Even the name conjured images of grandeur tinged with a hint of the macabre. Nestled in the heart of the Colorado Rockies, its imposing white facade and sprawling grounds were steeped in history, and, as I was well aware, a reputation for the paranormal. I was there last year, not as a thrill-seeker, but as a consultant, my work taking me to this iconic landmark in the quaint town of Estes Park. It was late, well past 2 a.m., when I finally wrapped up a lengthy conference call with a client overseas. The hotel was quiet, most guests long since retired for the night. As I walked back to my room, the rhythmic creaking of the old building seemed to echo the rhythmic beating of my own tired heart. Then, I heard it. A low, mournful sound, a moan that seemed to seep from the very walls of the hotel. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the usual nocturnal symphony of an old building settling, but as I drew closer to its source, it grew in intensity, taking on a distinctly human quality. It was a sound of profound sorrow, of utter despair. My steps slowed, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. The sound was definitely coming from down the hall. From room 217. Room 217. The number resonated with a chilling significance, even for someone like me who wasn't particularly well versed in the hotel's haunted lore. It was, as I vaguely recalled, the room that had inspired Stephen King's The Shining. A room with a history, a room with a reputation. A room that was supposed to be unoccupied. I stood there, frozen in the dimly lit hallway, the moan washing over me, each wave a fresh assault on my already frayed nerves. Doubt warred with a growing sense of dread. Was it just the wind? An old pipe? A trick of acoustics? But the sound, it was too human, too filled with pain to be anything natural. Then, the moan morphed, distorting into a series of choked sobs, followed by a desperate, heart-wrenching plea, barely a whisper, yet clear enough to make my blood run cold. "Help me, please." The words, laced with an almost unbearable anguish, seemed to hang in the air, a tangible manifestation of the room's dark energy. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. I wanted to run, to flee from the sound, from the room, from the hotel itself, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I forced myself to move, my steps hesitant at first, then gaining momentum as I practically ran towards the front desk, the mournful cries echoing in my ears. The night manager, a young man named Kevin with tired eyes and a perpetually weary expression, looked up in surprise as I burst into the lobby, my face pale, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Room 217, I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "There's someone in there. I heard them, they need help." Kevin's initial skepticism was evident in the slight arch of his eyebrow, but as he saw the genuine terror in my eyes, his expression shifted to one of concern. "Room 217 is unoccupied, sir," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's been vacant for weeks." I know, I insisted, my voice rising in pitch. "But I heard them, a woman, crying, asking for help. We need to check." He hesitated for a moment, then, perhaps sensing the urgency in my voice, or perhaps recalling some other incident, some other report, he sighed and nodded. "All right, sir," he said, grabbing a large, old-fashioned ring of keys. "Let's take a look." The walk back to room 217 felt like an eternity. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle from the shadows, sent my heart racing. Kevin, though outwardly calm, seemed to share some of my apprehension. His grip on the flashlight he carried was unusually tight, his gaze constantly scanning the hallway. As we approached the room, the silence that descended was almost more terrifying than the sounds I had heard earlier. The air grew noticeably colder, a chill that seeped into my bones, despite the hotel's heating. Kevin stopped in front of the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He turned the knob, slowly, deliberately. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a low groan, revealing the darkness within. The room was indeed empty, or at least, it appeared to be. It was quite cold, noticeably colder than the hallway, and a faint, almost metallic scent hung in the air, a scent I couldn't quite place but found deeply unsettling, like copper. A small corner of the window glass was broken, and a light breeze blew in, making a slight noise. A pile of blankets and old mattresses lay in a heap in the corner, but other than that, the room was bare. But as Kevin swept the flashlight beam across the walls, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. Faint scratches, like claw marks, marred the faded wallpaper, clustered around the window and near the door. They looked old, but desperate, as if someone had been trapped, clawing at the walls in a frantic attempt to escape. And under the window, barely visible in the dim light, was a dark stain on the floorboards, a stain that seemed to absorb the light, a stain that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Also the smell of copper became stronger as we approached the stain. Kevin, too, saw the scratches, the stain. His face, already pale, turned ashen. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "This isn't the first time," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the silent hum of the empty room. "There have been reports about this room." We searched the room thoroughly, but found nothing else amiss, nothing to explain the sounds, the scratches, the chilling atmosphere. After a while, we left, Kevin carefully closing the door behind us, his movements almost reverential, as if he were sealing away something ancient and malevolent. Back in the lobby, Kevin offered me a cup of strong coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he poured it. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and resignation. "You should close your door tightly at night," he said, his voice low and serious. "Try not to go out alone too much. There are many scary stories here. Things that happened a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer any further explanation, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air, a chilling testament to the hotel's dark history. That night, sleep was a distant, unattainable dream. I lay in my bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, every creak, every groan of the old building sending shivers down my spine. I found myself constantly glancing at the door, half expecting it to swing open, revealing the source of the mournful cries. I spent the rest of the night scrolling on my phone aimlessly, waiting for the first rays of dawn to break through the curtains. The next morning, I checked out of the Stanley Hotel, leaving behind the majestic scenery, the historic charm, and the lingering sense of dread that had settled over me like a shroud. As I drove away, I couldn't resist one last glance at the imposing structure, my gaze drawn to the window of room 217. It was supposed to be a carefree escape, a sister's weekend in the heart of Chicago. Last summer, my younger sister, Clara, and I flew in for a much-needed break from our mundane routines, eager to soak in the city's vibrant energy. We'd booked a room at the Sinclair, a chic boutique hotel nestled downtown, its sleek modern design a stark contrast to the historic architecture surrounding it. The first sign that our idyllic getaway might be taking a darker turn came during check-in. As we were finalizing the details with a friendly receptionist, a man brushed past us, almost knocking Clara off her feet. He was tall, strikingly so, with a shaved head that gleamed under the lobby's soft lighting and eyes that were almost unnervingly intense, like chips of obsidian. He didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge us, but as he passed, I heard him mutter something under his breath, a string of unintelligible words that sent a faint shiver down my spine. "What a jerk," Clara muttered, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Did you hear what he said?" "No," I replied, my gaze fixed on the man as he approached the reception desk. But he definitely seemed off. He checked in right after us, his movements swift and economical, his interaction with the receptionist curt and to the point. There was an air of barely suppressed energy about him, a coiled intensity that seemed at odds with the hotel's relaxed atmosphere. We tried to shake off the encounter, chalking it up to the typical rudeness one sometimes encounters in a big city. We spent the afternoon exploring Millennium Park, marveling at the Cloud Gate sculpture and enjoying the lively street performers. As evening approached, we decided to take advantage of the Sinclair's rooftop pool, a luxurious oasis offering panoramic views of the city skyline. The pool area was a haven of tranquility, the azure water shimmering under the setting sun. We settled into comfortable lounge chairs, sipping cocktails and soaking in the last rays of warmth. But our peaceful reverie was soon shattered. He appeared again, the man from the lobby. He walked to the edge of the pool area, fully dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed strangely out of place amidst the swimsuits and casual attire. He didn't swim, didn't even acknowledge the other guests. He simply stood there, his back to us, staring out at the cityscape, his hands clasped behind him. "Is that?" Clara began, her voice laced with unease. "It's him," I confirmed, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. "But he's not even using the pool," Clara whispered, as if afraid to break the strange silence that had fallen over the area. "And he's fully dressed." We watched him for a few minutes, his unmoving silhouette a stark contrast to the vibrant cityscape beyond. There was something deeply unsettling about his presence, about the way he seemed to be both present and utterly detached from his surroundings. "Let's go back to the room," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is creeping me out." I agreed. The man's presence had cast a pall over the evening, transforming the luxurious setting into something vaguely threatening. Back in our room, we tried to distract ourselves, flipping through channels on the TV, but the earlier sense of unease lingered. Every now and then, one of us would glance at the door, half expecting to see the man's imposing figure standing on the other side. Around 9 p.m., the knock came. "Room service," a man's voice announced. We hadn't ordered anything. A jolt of fear, sharp and sudden, shot through me. "We didn't order anything," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" "This is for room 1207, the voice persisted. It sounded muffled, indistinct, but there was a hint of something familiar about it. My heart pounded against my ribs. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. It was him. The man from the lobby, from the pool. He was standing in the hallway, his face partially obscured by the distorted lens, but his shaved head and intense eyes were unmistakable. He was holding a silver tray with a covered dish, but his posture, his demeanor, it wasn't that of a hotel employee. "We didn't order anything," I repeated, my voice louder this time, trying to project an authority I didn't feel. He lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the peephole, as if he could see me through it. Then, in a low, almost guttural voice, he said, "Enjoy your stay." And then, he was gone. I heard his footsteps receding down the hallway, slow and deliberate, until they faded into silence. We immediately called the front desk, our voices shaking as we relayed what had happened. The receptionist was apologetic, assuring us that no room service had been sent to our room and that they would investigate immediately. She also mentioned that they had received another complaint about this man, with a guest saying he tried to enter their room without permission. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived at our door. They were calm and professional, but their presence did little to alleviate our growing fear. They confirmed that the man had been identified and was being escorted out of the hotel. They also told us that he had used a fake ID and a stolen credit card to check in. The police were being called. The rest of the night was a blur of anxiety and fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sent our hearts racing. We double-checked the locks, barricaded the door with furniture, and took turns peering through the peephole, scanning the empty hallway for any sign of the man. We left the Sinclair early the next morning, cutting our trip short, the vibrant energy of Chicago replaced by a lingering sense of dread. The police never found him. The year was 1995. I was 10 years old, and my mother, Isabella, a refugee who had fled the turmoil in her home country, worked as a housekeeper at the opulent Grand Majestic Hotel in the heart of Washington, D.C. It was a world away from our small apartment in a less glamorous part of the city, a world of polished marble, gleaming chandeliers, and hushed conversations. Mommy, with her warm smile and gentle demeanor, was a favorite among both the staff and the guests. She took pride in her work, ensuring every room she cleaned was spotless, every surface gleaming. Her meticulous nature and inherent kindness often led Mr. Harrison, the hotel manager, to assign her to the rooms of VIP guests, the kind who tipped generously and demanded the utmost discretion. Then came Mr. K, or rather, the man who called himself Mr. K. He checked into the Ambassador Suite, the hotel's most expensive and luxurious accommodation, a sprawling space with panoramic views of the city. He was a nondescript man, neither tall nor short, neither young nor old, with an air of quiet affluence about him. He paid for a month in advance, a hefty sum that made Mr. Harrison's eyes gleam with approval. What made Mr. K unusual was his insistence on absolute privacy. The "Do Not Disturb" sign was perpetually displayed on his door, a silent prohibition against any intrusion. He never allowed housekeeping to enter, never requested room service, never even seemed to leave the suite. Yet, whenever he encountered staff in the hallways, he was unfailingly polite, even charming, and his tips, slipped discreetly into outstretched hands, were extraordinarily generous. His eccentricities were, therefore, overlooked, chalked up to the whims of the wealthy. Weeks turned into a month, and Mr. K became a fixture at the Grand Majestic, a phantom guest who was both present and absent. Mommy, like the rest of the staff, grew accustomed to his strange habits, to the perpetual "Do Not Disturb" sign, to the aura of mystery that surrounded him. Then, one crisp autumn morning, he was gone. Vanished without a trace, without a word of farewell, without even checking out. The "Do Not Disturb" sign, for the first time in over a month, was absent from the door of the Ambassador Suite. Mr. Harrison, his face a mask of concern and annoyance, summoned my mother. "Isabella," he said, his voice unusually tense, "I need you to clean the Ambassador Suite. Mr. K seems to have departed. And I doubt it's in any state to show another guest." Mommy, ever diligent, gathered her cleaning supplies and headed to the suite. I remember her mentioning later that a strange feeling, a prickling of unease, had settled over her as she rode the elevator up to the top floor. The silence in the hallway, usually bustling with activity, felt heavy, oppressive. She inserted the master key, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped inside. The first thing that hit her was the smell. A foul, cloying odor that hung heavy in the air, a stench of decay and something else, something indefinably chemical. It was a smell that instantly made her stomach churn, a smell that spoke of something deeply, terribly wrong. The suite itself was in a state of shocking disarray. It looked, as she later described it, like a hurricane had swept through, or a wild party, a rave, had taken place. Furniture was overturned, lamps were shattered, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. Clothes, food wrappers, and unidentifiable debris littered the floor, creating a scene of chaotic abandon that was utterly at odds with the hotel's usual pristine elegance. Mommy, her initial unease escalating into a growing sense of dread, cautiously made her way through the wreckage. The foul smell seemed to be emanating from the walk-in closet, a vast space that could have housed her entire wardrobe back home. With trembling hands, she pulled open the closet door. Inside, amidst a pile of discarded clothing and crumpled newspapers, was a large cardboard box. It was from this box that the stench was strongest, a wave of putrid air that made her gag. Hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest like a trapped bird, Mommy reached out and lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, was the decomposing head of a young woman. Her eyes, once surely full of life, were now vacant, staring up at the ceiling in a silent scream. Her skin, once smooth and flawless, was now mottled and discolored, a testament to the ravages of time and decay. A blood-curdling scream, raw and primal, tore from my mother's throat. She stumbled back, knocking over a stack of magazines, the horrific image seared into her mind. She scrambled out of the suite, out of that room of horrors, and into the hallway, her screams echoing through the silent corridors. The last thing she remembered was pressing the button for the elevator, the doors closing in on her like the jaws of a metal beast, before darkness consumed her. When she awoke, the hotel was swarming with police. The once orderly lobby was a chaotic scene of flashing lights, stern-faced officers, and hushed whispers. Mr. Harrison, his face ashen, informed her that Mr. K had used a fake name, a stolen credit card. The victim, they later discovered, was a young woman named Sarah, who had been working as an escort. Mommy quit her job that day. The Grand Majestic, once a symbol of a new life, a better future, had become a place of nightmares. The image of that poor girl's head, the stench of decay, the chilling realization of the evil that had lurked within those luxurious walls, haunted her for years to come. The true identity of Mr. K, the Ambassador Sweet Killer, as the press dubbed him, was never discovered. His case remains unsolved, a chilling testament to the darkness that can hide behind a charming smile, behind a facade of wealth and respectability.